My son maps everything. Streets, buildings, weather patterns, the exact route the mailman takes every Tuesday. That is what his brain does. He sees connections other people miss. So when his mother, the woman who abandoned him at age 3 without a word, suddenly showed up 13 years later with a lawyer and a plan to take his $4.2 million, I panicked. Samuel did not. He just looked at me the way he always does when I am not keeping up, patient, calm, slightly amused, and said, "Dad, I mapped this 8 months ago. She is late." Let that satisfying statement sit with you for a moment, because I need you to understand something. That boy, my boy, did not stumble into this level of preparation. He built it, quietly, methodically, the same way he builds everything, one grid square at a time. My name is James Whitfield. I am 54 years old. I live in Savannah, Georgia, in a house with a porch that creaks in the right places and an oak tree in the front yard that has been there longer than either of us. I drink my coffee black on that porch every single morning. I have done this for 13 years. Not because I love the routine, though I do, but because for 13 years I have been the only parent my son Samuel has ever known. I say my son. I mean it in the way that only a man who has folded the same blanket the same way 7,000 times can mean it. In the way that only someone who has learned that the overhead light in the kitchen has to be off before Samuel enters the room can mean it. In the way that only a father who once spent 11 straight hours sitting in a hospital waiting room, reading the same pamphlet on sensory integration therapy 4 times because his boy needed him on the other side of that door can mean it. Biology made me his father. Showing up made me his dad. There is a difference. Welcome to the story. Get comfortable, grab your coffee, and understand this from the start. The people in this story had every chance to do the right thing. One of them chose wrong. If this kind of story speaks to you, drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure you are subscribed. Trust me on this one. You are going to want to stay. Now, before I tell you what my son built, you need to understand what his mother destroyed. I met Monica Hargrove when I was 38 years old. I was a long-haul truck driver back then, running loads between Savannah and Memphis 3 times a week. She was working the front desk at a freight office in Midtown. Brown eyes, quick laugh. The kind of woman who could make a fluorescent-lit logistics office feel like somewhere you actually wanted to be. She was smart, sharp in a way that made you want to impress her. And she had this way of listening, really listening. Like whatever you were saying was the most important sentence anyone had spoken that day. I fell hard. I am not embarrassed to say it. When you spend most of your life in the cab of a truck watching highway lines disappear under your wheels, and then someone looks at you like you are worth stopping for, you do not ask too many questions. You just stop. We got married 5 months later. Looking back, I can see it now. The speed was not passion. It was avoidance. Monica did not want to wait long enough for the questions to catch up. But I did not know that then. All I knew was that I had someone. And after 20 years of having nobody, someone felt like everything. Samuel was born the following spring, April 19th. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. He came into the world so quietly the nurse actually checked twice to make sure he was breathing. That should have been my first clue about who this boy was going to be. He does everything quietly. Even arriving. The first year was good. Monica was attentive, present. She had this way of holding him on her hip while she moved through the kitchen that made the whole house feel full. I would come home from a run and find them on the porch, Samuel asleep on her chest, her bare feet up on the railing, and I would stand in the doorway for a moment just watching, thinking, this is it. This is the thing people talk about. He was diagnosed at 2. Autism spectrum. The doctor said it carefully. The way people deliver news they know will land heavy. She used words like developmental trajectory and early intervention and support framework. I sat there nodding, writing things down, already making a list of what to research when I got home. Monica sat there too, but she was not nodding. She was not writing anything down. She was looking at Samuel the way you look at a road you suddenly realize does not go where you thought it was going. Not angry. Not sad exactly. disconnected, like someone had flipped a switch behind her eyes, and the light that used to be there just quietly turned off. I watched it happen in real time over the next year. The slow withdrawal, the way she stopped picking him up when he reached for her, the way she started sitting on the other side of the room, the way she would look at Samuel lining up his toy cars in perfect rows on the living room floor, and instead of marveling at the precision of it, the beautiful mathematical order of his little mind, she would look away, like it was something she could not bear to see. She never said a word to me about leaving. Not one word. Not a hint. Not a warning. Not even a fight I could have pointed to later and said, "There, that was the moment." There was nothing. One morning, a Tuesday, Samuel was 3 years old. He was sitting on the kitchen floor, arranging wooden blocks into a grid pattern, so perfect it looked like a miniature city. Calm as still water, Monica kissed me on the cheek, said she was running to the store for milk. The door closed softly behind her. She never came back. She left behind a 3-year-old boy, a wedding ring placed neatly on the windowsill by the front door, and a silence so loud it took me 3 full days to stop hearing it. I found out later she had been seeing a man named Derek for 4 months, some account manager from a firm in Atlanta. They left together. She did not leave a note. She did not leave a number. She did not leave an explanation. She left a ring on glass, and an empty driveway, and a little boy who did not cry, did not scream, did not throw a single thing, but who spent the next 5 days doing something that still takes my breath away when I think about it. He drew a map of the house, every room, every door, and at the front entrance, he drew a small arrow pointing outward. No label, no words, just an arrow showing the direction someone had gone. He was 3 years old, and that was the first map Samuel ever drew. It would not be the last. Not by a long shot. She never told me she was leaving. Not one word. But looking back, she had been leaving for months. She just had not moved her body yet. I am not going to describe those first weeks in detail. Some things do not translate into words. They just sit in your chest, and you carry them, and every now and then they shift and you feel the weight all over again like the first time. I will tell you this much. I did not sleep for 6 days. Not because I could not, but because every time I closed my eyes, I heard the front door, and my whole body jolted upright, thinking she had come back. She had not. She never did. Samuel did not ask about her. Not once. I kept waiting for the question, kept rehearsing answers in my head that ranged from gentle to dishonest to somewhere painfully in between. But the question never came. Instead, he drew. That first map of the house, the one with the arrow at the front door, was followed by another the next day, then another, each one slightly different. The rooms got more detailed. The proportions got more accurate. By the end of the second week, a 3-year-old boy who could barely hold a crayon steady was producing floor plans that looked like they came from an architecture office. I did not understand it then. I thought it was grief wearing a different mask. And maybe it was, partly. But mostly it was Samuel doing what Samuel would always do, when the world did not make sense. He mapped it. He measured it. He drew lines between things until the distance between them became something he could hold in his hands. I quit the long-haul routes within a month. Could not do it. Could not spend 3 days in a truck cab knowing my boy was being watched by a rotating cast of neighbors and a daycare system that did not know the overhead kitchen light had to stay off. I traded the whole American highway system for a kitchen table in Savannah, Georgia, and I have never once regretted it. I picked up work where I could find it. Electrical repairs mostly, some plumbing, the occasional drywall job for a contractor named Luis who never asked questions and always paid on time. It was not glamorous work, and it was not consistent work, but it kept the lights on, and it kept me within 15 minutes of my son at all times, and that was the only metric that mattered. I learned everything the hard way. The sensory triggers, the routines, the way his whole body would lock up if a sound hit wrong or a texture surprised him. I learned that his blanket had to be folded with the tag facing down and the left corner tucked exactly 1 inch under the mattress, or he would not sleep. That fluorescent lights made his teeth hurt, his words, not mine. That he could eat exactly 4 foods without distress. And introducing a fifth took approximately 3 months of patient, excruciating negotiation. I learned that Samuel did not communicate the way the books said autistic children communicated. He did not fit their flowcharts. He communicated through maps. If he was happy, the maps were dense, full of color and detail, and little symbols only he understood. If he was overwhelmed, the maps got sparse. Clean lines, empty spaces. Like he was trying to simplify the world down to something manageable. And Lord, the maps. By 7, his bedroom walls were covered, floor to ceiling. I would stand in his doorway some mornings with my coffee and just stare at them like a man visiting a museum he accidentally built. By 10, visitors would come in the front door and stop mid-sentence. Mrs. Delphine Robard from next door, 72 years old, 5 feet 1 inch of sweet tea and unsolicited opinions, came over one afternoon to bring her usual casserole, and stood in that hallway for a full 3 minutes without saying a word. For Delphine Robard, that was roughly equivalent to a medical event. She looked at those maps covering every inch of wall, and then she looked at me and she said, "James Whitfield, that boy of yours has got the whole world in his head and he is just letting you peek at it." She was right. Delphine was always right. She had been the first person to show up after Monica left, standing on my porch at 7:30 in the morning with a casserole dish and a look on her face that said, "Do not argue with me, I am feeding you." She became the grandmother Samuel never had. Every Thursday afternoon she would sit with him on her porch while he drew maps of her garden, and she would talk to him about absolutely everything. The weather, the state of the azaleas, the questionable moral character of the squirrels who kept stealing from her bird feeder. And Samuel would listen and draw, and occasionally nod in a way that made Delphine beam like she had just been given the highest possible compliment. Then there was Keith Dawson, Samuel's teacher, at the Special Education Center on Waters Avenue. 40 years old, built like a man who had played college football, and still remembered how, with the patience of someone who had chosen this work because he believed in it, not because it was easy. Keith was the first person outside our house who looked at Samuel's maps and said, "This is not a hobby. This is how he thinks. This is his language." Keith fought for Samuel in every IEP meeting, every evaluation, every single conversation with administrators who wanted to put him in a box that was too small, and he did it sitting next to me, just me. One signature on every line. One parent in every room. For 13 years, I want you to hold that detail, because it is going to matter later. We had a rhythm, Samuel and I. Mornings on the porch, me with my coffee, him with his sketchbook. School days with Keith. Thursday afternoons with Delphine. Saturday mornings at the ice cream shop on Bull Street where the owner, a large, quiet man named George, knew Samuel's order by heart and never once made him repeat it. Butter pecan. 1 scoop, in a cup, never a cone. That was our world. Small and steady and mapped to perfection, the way Samuel liked everything. Every surface in his bedroom covered with cartography that grew more astonishing by the year. Maps of the neighborhood that were accurate to the inch. Maps of Savannah that included streets he had never walked, but somehow drew correctly. And then, around 12, something shifted. He started drawing places that did not exist. Landscapes and terrains and coastlines that came from somewhere inside his head, rendered with a level of geological detail that made no scientific sense for a boy who had never taken a geography class beyond the 7th grade. I did not know what they were. I just knew they were beautiful. I pinned them up next to the others and kept bringing him paper. And then the tech people showed up, and everything changed. A man named Adrian Goss flew from San Francisco to Savannah, Georgia, on a Tuesday afternoon in March for the sole purpose of standing in my son's bedroom and looking at a wall. I want you to picture that for a moment. A senior data engineer from one of the largest mapping technology companies in the world, A man whose calendar I can only assume was booked in 15-minute increments, took a 5-hour flight, rented a car at the airport, drove 40 minutes into the old city, walked into my house, stepped into Samuel's room, and did not speak for almost 12 minutes. I timed it. I was standing in the doorway with my coffee, which was getting cold, watching a grown man in a $200 shirt stare at my son's drawings, like he had just found a scripture nobody knew existed. Here is how it happened. Keith Dawson, Samuel's teacher, had a college roommate who worked in geospatial analytics. Keith had shown him a few photos of Samuel's maps at a reunion. The roommate had shown his boss. The boss had shown Adrian Goss. And Adrian Goss had apparently looked at those photos, gone very quiet, and booked a flight within the hour. What Samuel had been drawing since he was 12. Those imaginary landscapes and coastlines and terrain formations that I thought were just beautiful inventions of a beautiful mind were not imaginary. They were predictive terrain models. His brain was processing geographical and topological data from sources he had absorbed through books, satellite images, and sheer intuition, and generating landform projections that matched patterns it took professional software months to compute. Adrian Goss stood in that bedroom and said, very slowly, as if choosing each word with surgical care, "Mr. Whitfield, your son is not drawing maps. He is building algorithms. With a pencil." I did not know what to say to that. So I said the only thing that made sense to me at the time. "You want some coffee?" He did. We sat on the porch, because that is where all important conversations in my house happen, and Adrian explained what he was seeing in language he kept adjusting downward for my benefit, which I appreciated because I am an electrician who used to drive trucks, not a data scientist. The gist was this. Samuel's maps contained pattern logic that was, in Adrian's words, years ahead of anything commercially available. The terrain models, the topographical predictions, the way his drawings encoded elevation shifts and geological formations into visual shorthand, all of it represented a form of spatial computation that had serious, tangible, extraordinary value. I sat there on my porch in Savannah, Georgia, listening to a man from Silicon Valley tell me my boy's bedroom wall was worth a fortune, and I remember thinking two things at once. The first was that I needed to protect my son. The second was that I needed more coffee. What followed was 4 months of conversations I was not remotely qualified for. Lawyers, patent specialists, licensing consultants, people whose job titles had so many words in them I stopped trying to remember. Ray Hodges, my attorney, a steady man with 25 years of family law experience, and the demeanor of someone who had seen everything twice, handled most of the legal architecture. But the decisions, every single one, went through Samuel. Because here is the thing about my son. Samuel was 14 when the conversation started, and he understood every word those tech people said, better than I did, better than some of them did. He would sit at the kitchen table during conference calls, not saying much, and then after everyone hung up, he would look at me and say something like, "Their offer undervalues the predictive accuracy by approximately 37%, based on comparable licensing agreements in the geospatial sector from the last fiscal year." He was 14. The final deal closed 6 months later. A major technology corporation acquired licensing rights to Samuel's algorithmic mapping models for $4.2 million. I am going to write that again because it still does not feel real to me. $4.2 million for the drawings on a bedroom wall in Savannah, Georgia, made by a boy who eats butter pecan ice cream from a cup and cannot tolerate the sound of a ceiling fan on high speed. The money was placed in a trust managed by a fiduciary team that Samuel had personally vetted. He was 15 by then. He vetted them. I signed the papers because legally I had to. But he chose the team. He reviewed their performance records. He asked questions during the interview process that made one of the candidates visibly nervous. On the drive home after the final signing, I pulled the truck into the parking lot of a hardware store on Abercorn Street because I could not see the road anymore. I was crying, full, embarrassing, shaking, crying. The kind where your hands grip the steering wheel and your jaw locks, and you cannot get a clean breath. 13 years of doing this alone. 13 years of wondering if I was enough. 13 years of folding blankets and memorizing triggers and sitting in waiting rooms and showing up to every meeting at that table by myself. And now this. Samuel sat in the passenger seat and waited. He did not touch me. He did not try to stop it. He just waited the way he waits for everything, with a patience that has no bottom. After a while, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 10, he reached over and placed his hand on my forearm. Light pressure. Exact. Deliberate. Dad, he said. His voice was calm, unhurried, the same voice he uses to explain algorithms and ice cream preferences and weather patterns. Crying in a hardware store parking lot is statistically unlikely to improve the situation, but if it helps, the deal was priced correctly. I checked. I laughed. I laughed so hard the truck shook. I laughed until the crying and the laughing became the same thing, and I could not tell where one ended and the other began. And Samuel sat there with his hand on my arm and waited for me to finish. And when I finally wiped my face and turned to look at him, he had the smallest trace of a smile on his face. Samuel, almost smiling, was worth more than $4.2 million. I would have traded every cent for that look. Now, if you have been listening for a while, and you want stories like this to keep coming, it genuinely helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. I mean that sincerely. It matters more than you think. Thank you. All right, back to it. Because here is where you need to sit up and pay close attention. That $4.2 million did not just change our lives. It sent a signal that traveled through legal databases and public records and whatever dark little channels money-hungry people monitor when they smell an opportunity. And 7 months after that deal closed, someone came knocking on our door. And it was not the tech company. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning. I was under a kitchen sink on East Broad Street, replacing a garbage disposal unit when my cell buzzed in my back pocket. I almost let it go to voicemail. I wish I had. The voice on the other end was polished in that particular way that tells you every syllable is being billed, smooth, measured. Mr. Whitfield, my name is Denise Carpenter. I am an attorney with Carpenter and Hollis in Atlanta. I am reaching out regarding the financial welfare of your son, Samuel. I set down the wrench. Slowly. His name is Samuel Whitfield, I said. And who exactly are you reaching out on behalf of? A pause. The kind of pause that is not silence but strategy. My client is Monica Whitfield, Samuel's biological mother. I am going to be honest with you. I have felt a lot of things in 54 years. The loneliness of a truck cab at 3 in the morning. The terror of a 2-year-old seizure in a bathtub. The quiet devastation of folding a woman's laundry 2 weeks after she left because I had not yet accepted she was gone. But what I felt hearing my son's mother's name for the first time in 13 years, sitting on a stranger's kitchen floor with a wrench in my hand, that was something new. Somewhere between fury and disbelief, and the specific sickness you feel when someone reaches into a wound you thought had scarred over and pulls it open with manicured fingers. I went very still. The dangerous kind of still. And what are Miss Whitfield's concerns? I asked, impressed by how calm I sounded. Denise Carpenter explained, in language so professionally wrapped it almost disguised what it actually was, that Monica believed Samuel's financial affairs were being mismanaged. That as his biological mother, she had legal standing to petition for oversight. That there were, and I am quoting, serious questions about whether Samuel's best interests have been adequately represented, given the significant sums involved. I walked to the window, looked out at the street where a woman was walking a dog and a kid was riding a bike, and the whole world was going about its business as if mine had not just caught fire. Miss Carpenter, I said, tell your client she is welcome to try. Then things moved fast. Faster than I was ready for. Within a week, my name was on national news. CNN ran a segment. The headline read something along the lines of, Advocacy Group raises concerns over autistic teen's multi-million-dollar patent deal. And there was Monica. On my television screen, 13 years of nothing, and there she was, sitting in a studio chair with soft lighting and tasteful makeup, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, telling a camera and 6 million viewers that she had been fighting to reconnect with her son for years, but had been blocked at every turn by a controlling father who was profiting from his disability. She cried. Real tears or manufactured ones, I could not tell, and it did not matter because the camera does not distinguish between the two. She had a representative from a child advocacy organization beside her, nodding along with the gravity of someone who had already chosen sides before the interview started. I turned the television off, sat in the dark in my kitchen, and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Fear. Not for myself. I have been through worse than headlines. I was afraid for Samuel, for what this noise was going to do to the one place in the world where he had always been safe. His routines. His walls covered in maps. His butter pecan on Saturdays. His Thursday afternoons with Delphine. Every carefully constructed grid of his carefully constructed life, about to be shaken by a woman who had not earned the right to touch a single square of it. By Friday, a reporter knocked on my door at 7:15 in the morning. I did not answer. Delphine Robard answered instead, from her porch next door, in her bathrobe, holding a coffee mug, and delivered what I can only describe as a master class in Southern hospitality, laced with weapons-grade disapproval. I did not hear all of it, but I caught the phrase, "Young man, if you do not remove yourself from that porch in the next 10 seconds, I am going to call my nephew, who is a deputy sheriff, and my pastor, who is scarier." And the reporter was in his car before she finished the sentence. Delphine came inside after and put her hand on my shoulder. She did not ask if I was okay. She just squeezed once and said, "That woman has got some nerve. But nerve is not the same as right, James. Remember that?" I nodded. But I was not thinking about nerve or right. I was thinking about the fact that Monica had not just come back with a lawyer. She had come back with a narrative. A story so clean, so sympathetic, so perfectly constructed that it had reached millions of people before I had said a single word. Suddenly, I was the villain. The man exploiting a disabled boy's genius for personal profit. I knew how to wire a house. I knew how to fold a blanket exactly the way my son needed it. I did not know how to fight someone who had already convinced the world I was the monster. I sat there for a long time that night. The house was dark. The maps on Samuel's walls upstairs were invisible in the blackness, but I knew they were there. Every line, every grid, every inch of a world my boy had built to keep himself safe. And I was terrified that I could not protect it. Then I heard his door open upstairs. The familiar creak of the hinge I kept meaning to oil, but never did, because Samuel said he liked it. He said it was how he knew the house was still working. Footsteps on the stairs, slow, measured. The way he moved through every space, like he had already mapped the route. Samuel appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing his gray hoodie, carrying a large cardboard tube under his arm, the kind architects used to store blueprints. He looked at me in the dark. He looked at the television, turned off but still warm. He looked at my phone on the table, still glowing with notifications I had stopped reading hours ago. "We need to talk, Dad," he said, in that calm, unhurried voice that has never once risen above the volume of a quiet conversation. "I have something to show you." He placed the cardboard tube on the kitchen table, the way a general places a battle plan on a war room desk. No hesitation. No ceremony. Just purpose. "Turn on the light, Dad." I did. And what he unrolled across that table in the pale yellow glow of our kitchen at 11:30 at night is something I will never be able to adequately describe to you, but I am going to try. It was a map. Of course it was a map. But it was not a map of streets or terrain or imaginary coastlines. It was a map of people. Names, dates, phone numbers, legal entities, financial connections, all of it drawn in Samuel's precise hand, linked by lines of varying thickness that represented, as he explained to me with the calm demeanor of someone presenting a quarterly earnings report, the strength and frequency of each connection. At the center was Monica's name. Branching outward from her were Denise Carpenter, the law firm Carpenter and Hollis, a child advocacy organization called Voices for Families, a man named Derek Pruitt, and a web of financial transactions that connected all of them in ways I had not begun to imagine. I stared at it. Then I stared at him. "How long?" I said. "8 months," he said. "I started when I detected the preliminary inquiry." "You detected it?" He gave me that look. The one that very patiently communicates I have once again underestimated him. "I built a monitoring system for my financial accounts when I was 13. Automated alerts. Someone ran a background check on you 11 months ago through a firm connected to Carpenter and Hollis in Atlanta." He paused. "I did not tell you because I did not want you to worry before there was a concrete threat to address." I put both hands flat on the table, looked at the map, looked at my son, looked back at the map. "Samuel," I said slowly, "are you telling me you have been running counterintelligence from your bedroom for 8 months while I have been out here panicking?" "That is an accurate summary, yes. I am not going to pretend I was not slightly insulted. I am also not going to pretend I was not the proudest I had ever been in my entire life. Both things existed at the same time, and neither one canceled the other out." "Okay," I said. "Walk me through it. Here is what my son had built. And I need you to understand the scope. Because when I say this boy was prepared, I mean prepared the way an engineer is prepared. Not just with a plan, but with systems to support the plan and backups for the systems. First, my records. Everything I had kept over 13 years. Every doctor visit, every therapy session, every IEP document with my signature as the sole attending parent. School attendance records. Specialist consultations. Prescription histories. A paper trail 13 years long with one name on every single line. Mine, never Monica. Not once. Second, Samuel's own archive. He had maintained, without my knowledge, a personal record of every significant event in his life and who was present. Birthdays, hospitalizations, school performances. Everyone documented with dates, names, and a notation in his own handwriting. The column for maternal attendance was blank on every single page. Third, and this is where I had to sit down, the connection map showed that Derek Pruitt, the man Monica had left with 13 years ago, was now a co-signer on a real estate investment that shared a financial advisor with Voices for Families, the same organization sitting next to Monica on CNN. The whole thing was not a rescue mission. It was a business arrangement wearing a sympathy costume. Ray Hodges arrived at 8 the next morning. He sat at the kitchen table, put on his reading glasses, and spent 45 minutes going through Samuel's materials with the expression of a man watching a magic show performed by an accountant. When he finished, he took off his glasses, looked at me, and said quietly, "James, this kid just won the case." But Samuel was not finished. He had also anticipated the media strategy. He knew Monica's play was not just legal. It was public. And the way you beat that, Samuel explained to us both, is not by making one loud counterstatement. One statement gets one news cycle, he said. Then it is buried. You release everything at once, they pick what they want, and ignore the rest. No. He tapped the map. You give them one piece per day. You make them come back. You control the pace. Ray stared at him. How do you know this? Samuel looked at Ray the way I imagine a cartographer looks at someone who has asked what a compass does. I read. And so it began. 14 days. 14 documents. Each one released through Samuel's legal team. 2 attorneys he had researched and selected himself, in a sequence he had personally mapped. Day 1. My attendance records from 13 years of school meetings. Day 2. Therapy billing showing one guarantor for 15 years. Day 3. Samuel's own written statement, brief and devastating, describing his life and the complete absence of his biological mother. Day 4. The financial connection between Derek Pruitt and Voices for Families. By day 4, the tone had shifted so hard, I barely recognized the coverage. The same outlets running exploitation headlines were now using words like misrepresentation and coordinated campaign. By day 7, Voices for Families issued a statement distancing themselves from Monica. By day 10, two journalists who had originally run Monica's story published corrections. By day 12, Derek Pruitt was suddenly unavailable for comment on anything, ever. And through all of it, Samuel sat on the front porch every afternoon with his sketchbook, drawing a new map of something, I never asked what, with the peaceful focus of a boy who had already calculated every possible outcome and found them all acceptable. One evening I brought him a glass of lemonade and stood there watching him sketch. "Are you okay?" I asked. He did not look up. His pencil kept moving. "She bothered me when I was 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, he said quietly. "She does not have that kind of access anymore." I stood there and drank my own lemonade and did not say a word. Because what do you say to that? What do you say to a boy who processed 13 years of abandonment so thoroughly that the woman who caused it no longer has the power to make him flinch? The hearing was set for a Thursday in October. Wednesday evening, Samuel found me on the porch, sat down next to me, and said two things I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The streetlights along our block come on at exactly 6:47 in October. I know this because Samuel mapped the lighting schedule of our entire neighborhood when he was 9, and it has not changed since. We sat on the porch in the amber glow, him in his gray hoodie, me with a coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and the oak tree in the front yard catching the last purple edge of dusk. He was quiet for a while. Samuel's silences are never empty. They are structured. He is arranging things before he speaks, putting the words in the right order, making sure the map of the sentence is accurate before he hands it to you. "Dad," he said finally, "you gave up the entire highway system of the United States for a kitchen table in Savannah, Georgia." I looked at him. I did not know where he was going with that. "That," he said, "is the biggest map I have ever seen, because it showed me exactly where home was." I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I closed it. Tried again. Still nothing. So I just sat there, holding my cold coffee, looking at the oak tree, and letting the sentence do what it needed to do inside my chest. Then he said the second thing. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you need to understand something. You did not fail me. You never failed me. You showed up. That is the whole map, Dad. Everything else is just coordinates." I set the coffee down because my hands were not steady enough to hold it. I did not cry. I wanted to, but I did not, because Samuel does not do well with unexpected emotional displays, and I was not about to make the night before the most important day of our lives about my inability to keep it together. So I just nodded. And he nodded. And we sat there until the streetlights were the only light left. We left at 7 the next morning. Samuel wore a white button-down shirt he had ironed himself, creased so precisely it looked like it had been done by machine. He carried the map tube under his arm like a soldier carrying a flag into something inevitable. I carried the coffee. That felt like enough. The Chatham County Courthouse is a gray stone building downtown that looks exactly the way courthouses always look, like it was designed to remind you how small you are. Monica was already there when we arrived, standing near the entrance with Denise Carpenter and 2 other members of her legal team, and a woman I recognized from the Voices for Families segment. All of them in clothes that cost more than my truck payment, radiating the confidence of people who had not yet realized the ground had shifted completely beneath them. Monica looked good. I will give her that. 50 years old and polished in the way that takes real effort and is designed to read as effortless. She looked at me when I walked in. I looked back, and I felt nothing. I think that surprised her. She was expecting anger, maybe fear. Instead, she got James Whitfield walking calmly across the courthouse lobby, finishing the last sip of gas station coffee from a paper cup. She looked at Samuel. Something crossed her face, there and gone in under a second. Something that might have been grief if it had been allowed to stay long enough to become real. Samuel looked at her the way he looked at most things. Steady, curious, completely unintimidated. He nodded at her politely. The way you nod at a stranger holding a door. She flinched. Just barely. I noticed. The hearing began at 9. I am not going to walk you through every legal minute because, honestly, Watching Ray and Samuel's attorneys work with 14 days of documentation behind them was less like a legal battle and more like watching someone calmly present a completed jigsaw puzzle to a person who had insisted the pieces did not exist. Denise Carpenter pushed back hard, called the document releases a targeted harassment campaign, tried to reframe the financial connections as circumstantial. But by mid-morning, even the air in the room had changed. Judge Harriet Beaumont, a measured woman with silver-streaked hair, and the expression of someone who had seen every variety of human nonsense and was permanently unimpressed by it, had clearly made up her mind and was now simply allowing the process to finish. At 11:15, there was a recess. Samuel stood, buttoned his shirt, and said to his attorney quietly, "I would like to make the offer now." His attorney approached Denise Carpenter with a sealed envelope. Inside was a single typed page. I had read it the night before. 3 paragraphs. It said that Samuel Stewart Whitfield was prepared to cease all document releases and pursue no further action, provided that Monica withdrew her petition entirely and permanently, waived all future claims, and left. Just left. Denise read it, conferred with Monica in the corner. I watched Monica's face from across the hall. The calculation behind her eyes. The weighing. The working out of whether she still had a move. She looked up at Samuel, and she shook her head. Samuel had anticipated it. He turned to me, and for one brief moment, I saw something in his face I had not seen since he was very small. Not pain. Something older than pain. Something that had been folded and filed and put away a long time ago and was only briefly visible now on its way out forever. Then it was gone. He reached for the map tube. When court reconvened and the tube was opened, Judge Beaumont looked up from the bench with an expression I will remember until the day I leave this earth. Because what unrolled across the evidence table was not a legal document. It was a map, 2 meters wide, hand-drawn, every line precise, every connection documented. The outer edges showed Monica's network, Denise Carpenter, Derek Pruitt, Voices for Families, financial lines, legal entities, communication records, 13 years of absence rendered in cartographic detail. But the center of the map was different. The center was a house, a small hand-drawn house with a porch and an oak tree in the front yard. And inside that house, written in Samuel's careful hand, were names. James Whitfield, Delphine Robard, Keith Dawson, George, Bull Street. And at the kitchen table, a small figure with a coffee cup. Everyone who had actually been there. Everyone who had actually stayed. And at the very edge of the map, as far from the center as geometry allowed, a single dot, labeled in handwriting so small you had to lean in to read it. Monica. Last known location. Nowhere in my life. The courtroom went so silent, I could hear the ventilation system above the ceiling tiles. Judge Beaumont looked at the map. Then she looked at Monica. Monica was staring at that center house, at all those names, at the kitchen table and the coffee cup, and the distance between where they were and where she was. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was very still. The petition was withdrawn before lunch. She left the courthouse without a word. No statement, no press conference. She walked through the front doors, got into a black car, and was gone. And this time, nobody stood at the door watching the driveway. I stood on the courthouse steps in the October air and felt something I had not felt in so long. I almost did not recognize it. Quiet. Not silence. Quiet. There is a difference. Silence is the absence of sound. Quiet is the absence of weight. The specific kind that only comes when something that has been pressing down on your chest for a very long time finally, completely, lifts. I stood there and breathed. Just breathed. The oak trees along the courthouse sidewalk were catching that low autumn light that turns everything in Savannah golden, and for the first time in weeks I was not thinking about lawyers, or headlines, or the sound of Monica's voice on a television screen. I was just standing in the sun and breathing and feeling the strange, unfamiliar lightness of a man who has been carrying something heavy and has finally been told he can set it down. Samuel came through the courthouse doors and stood beside me. He had the map tube tucked under his arm again, empty now. He looked at the street the way he always looks at streets, with quiet assessment, noting patterns, filing information. We stood there for a moment, both of us just existing in the same space without needing to fill it with words. "How do you feel?" I asked. He considered it. Genuinely considered it, the way he considers everything, like the question deserved the same precision as a terrain calculation. "Resolved," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, me too." He looked up at me. "Can we get ice cream?" "You only had coffee, and you did not finish it." I laughed. "The real kind. The kind that starts deep and comes out easy and does not carry anything behind it, except exactly what it is." "Yeah, buddy. We can absolutely get ice cream." We drove to Bull Street. The shop looked the same way it always looked, small and bright with the awning that had been faded since before Samuel was born. George was behind the counter. He looked at Samuel, nodded once, and had a cup of butter pecan on the counter before we reached the register. He never made Samuel repeat his order. Not once in 10 years. There is a kindness in that kind of consistency that I do not think people appreciate enough. We sat in our usual spot by the window. The October sun came through the glass at that low angle that makes everything look like it belongs in a painting, which is something I have thought every single time we have sat in this booth, and something I will probably think every single time we sit here for the rest of my life. Samuel opened his sketchbook. Not the black notebook, not the legal documents, not the map of connections and accusations, and 13 years of absence. A fresh sketchbook, clean pages. He picked up his pencil and began to draw. I watched him for a moment. "What are you mapping?" He did not look up. "Somewhere we have not been yet." "Where?" His pencil paused. He thought about it. Then he looked up at me with that almost smile. The one that is worth more than every dollar in every trust account in the state of Georgia, and said, "I do not know yet. That is the point. Somewhere new. Together." I drank my coffee. George had brought it without asking. Black, the way I take it. The way I have taken it every Saturday morning at this counter for 10 years. I watched the street through the window, and I watched my son draw, and I did not say anything because some moments do not need words. Some moments you just sit inside and let them be what they are. We drove home as the afternoon turned golden. Samuel went upstairs to his room. I stood in the doorway a few minutes later and saw that he had already hung the map on the center wall, good light, right where you could see it when you walked in. But he had added something. A small piece of paper, taped neatly over the little house at the center, with one line written in his careful hand. "Home is not a place. Home is who stays." I looked at it for a long time. Then I looked at the windowsill by the front door. The ring was still there. 13 years of morning light, and it had not moved. I picked it up for the first time since the morning Monica left. Held it in my palm. It was lighter than I remembered. I set it down in a kitchen drawer and closed it. It did not belong on the windowsill anymore. It did not belong anywhere I could see it. That evening, I sat on the porch with my coffee. The oak tree was doing what it always does in October, holding onto its leaves a little longer than everything else around it, like it had decided the season was not over until it said so. Samuel was inside, drawing. Delphine was on her porch next door, pretending to read a magazine but actually keeping an eye on us the way she always does, because that woman has been standing guard over this family since the day Monica left, and she has never once asked for credit. I thought about highways, about all the miles I used to drive, all the distance I used to put between myself and the world, and I thought about how the shortest distance I ever traveled, from the cab of a truck to a kitchen table in Savannah, turned out to be the longest journey, and the only one that ever mattered. I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it the way I mean it. God puts people in your life for a reason. Sometimes the reason is obvious, and sometimes it takes 13 years in a courtroom and a 2-meter hand-drawn map to see it clearly. But God does not make mistakes about who stays. He just asks you to trust the map he has already drawn. And I believe, with everything I am, that God looked at a little boy sitting on a kitchen floor drawing arrows on paper and said, "That one is going to be just fine, because I gave him a father who knows how to stay." Samuel did not need saving. He never did. He just needed someone to show up. And I will show up for that boy every single day until I have no days left. That is not a promise. That is just the map. And I have never once gotten lost following it. If this story touched something in your heart, I would be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment and tell me your story, because I promise you, someone in this community needs to read it. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what comes next. And as always, thank you. Not just for listening, for staying. That is the whole thing, is it not? Staying. I will see you on the next one.